Good eve and welcome back to Craic on the Coast, an AOH podcast where history, heritage, and the Irish heart all come together here in America's hometown and beyond, where we dive into stories, songs, and spirit that echo not just our community, but also outside and beyond that. This week's episode, we're really excited because we are having Caroilin Callery, the founder of the National Famine Way, in to discuss the history, what their ongoing have, and what the future holds, not just for the Famine Way itself, but Strokestown Park and globally. We were very lucky to have met her when myself and other members of our division were over doing the National Famine Way ourselves, and we are very delighted to have her on the show today. Thank you for being on, Caroilin.
Dave, I can't Michael and you, and just absolutely delighted to be here and to be chatting with you guys.
Thank you. As we said, we were over there, about a month ago now, where we did the National Famine Walk. We got to experience it in all the different types of weather conditions and everything else. We actually had two episodes where myself and John Sullivan, who came on the walk, where we kind of gave a synopsis of what our experience was, and in some ways very life-changing, and the experience of not just the walk, but the different towns along the walk, Strokestown itself, and meeting the people that are involved. And you were one of those individuals. And for everybody that's listening, Caroilin is the founder of the National Famine Way. So everything we have been talking about, we've been giving information to our listeners. She's the individual responsible for it. So I guess the first question I would have for you, Caroilin, is how did all that happen? Because it's an amazing feat that you have accomplished in just a few years since the Famine Way has been up and running.
And before I answer that directly, I guess I would like to say I've been interviewed on many occasions, but it's wonderful to be interviewed by someone who has walked the walk. You have the blisters, you went through all the different seasons. So that's extra special for today's episode, and well done to you. And I think there was 6 of you guys all together, if I'm right.
Yep.
It is a trek, and it's super just to know that you know exactly what I'm talking about as I talk. So you walked every step of that 165 kilometers, so that's fair dues to you guys. How did it all start? I guess you could say it started in 2015 if you talk about the National Famine Way, but really it started in 1847 when Denis Mahon started writing out ship lists for his famine and emigration scheme. Those names, I suppose, were put on those documents in 1847. He was getting eviction orders for a large number of tenants, and he offered an assisted emigration scheme. And those that availed of it were written by townland, surname, number in the group. And those documents sat in an archive then. He had gotten rid of what he called his surplus population. The estate was in dire straits, and their vision and their way out of it was literally to clear as many of the people off the land as they could, however they could. So those 1,490 people left the estate, and I suppose in Denis Mahon's head that will be the end of it. That's the beauty, I suppose, and the wonder of archives. Those ship lists sat there for over 166 odd years until we came across them in the Strokestown archive in around 2011, 2012. We had known there was an emigration scheme, but we thought around 1,000 people. We did have, there's a list called Brown's List, but it's a very different list. It was a Bishop Brown that wrote it. And we had the names of ships. We had little bits of vague information. We knew that they had gone to Canada and sailed in through Craic, and that they had spread from there. Really interestingly, we had very little knowledge on the ground in Strokestown, very little memory in Strokestown that our people had gone to Canada. Again, that's veil of silence that had kind of persisted for 150 odd years, really, if we want to be honest with ourselves, had kind of ensured that a lot of these people were forgotten on the homelands from where they'd left. And it was a joy really to come across the list, because it gave us back the names. We had the names of these people that had been kind of virtually wiped away, and they had resurfaced back, and we were able to give them the dignity of naming them. And that was a very special thing to us on the ground. I suppose the Manor House, and you saw the Manor House in Strokestown, is there in all its glory, but the layers of society and that network that had actually supported it and built it and, fed it for all its glory, had been long since gone. And the accommodation they'd lived in, and most of these people would have been fourth class housing, which is effectively a mud hut. You're below cottage level here. It's mud walls, no windows, one door opening, and a central kind of smoke escape as a chimney in the middle, and a one room for all of a family. So that was long gone, while the manor has since stood.
Now you talk about
beauty of Stroke.
You talk about how one thing I'm really intrigued about is the idea of, like how you said, like the history was veiled. For someone that grew up in that area and the manor must have been there, did it represent what? Did it have a negative representation, or did people fully know and understand the history behind the manor, growing up, as a child in the area?
Yeah, so as a child in the area, it would have been what we called the big house. And at that point in time, Olive Hales Packnamahan was still living there. And she was quite maternal in a kind of a aristocratic, bossy way around the town. She had a visibility around the town. But she did things like she was involved with the local drama society and that, but she saw it as her territory. But in a reasonably caring way. But her son Nicholas would have been the next to inherit. And Nicholas was in the British Army in England. So at the time, you were really in the 70s and in the depths of the Troubles. And he wasn't able to return home, and he was never going to be able to come and inherit it. The attitude in the people in the town was always very... It's a really interesting one, and I've looked at this over the decades. Like at the time in the 70s, there would have been the big house. Many of them have been burnt in the decades previously. And if Olive, I think, hadn't been so maternal, Strokestown Park might have come to that same fate. But you had that stereotypical attitude on the top level, which was that anger and that, while you wouldn't even connect it back to the famine, just that knowing that it was wrong, the structure was wrong, and it had done us wrong without it being named, and that was the veil of it. But then you also had the huge employment they had given around the town, and like in the 2000s, there was a big house documentary done, and let's say that the housekeeper that was with Olive and the gardener and all of those families who would work maybe for generations in the big house would speak quite nicely and kindly and fondly of the family.
Sure.
So it was a real kind of juxtaposed story. But as a child in the 70s, I mean, there was the famine wasn't on the curriculum. I never in any of my education system came across it when I studied history. There was no talk about it in Strokestown. There was no knowledge of it even in County Roscommon. So from that point of view, there was nothing really until Olive sold the house in 1979, actually, to my father. And it was her that suggested that maybe he consider purchasing it. And he had a garage, he had a business in the town, a garage, and he had fought with her for quite a number of years. Right to the steps of the court, she'd be giving out that there was trucks and machinery on the street in her town, and all of these arguments were going on, and court proceedings issued, etc. But
small town politics.
He was at one point looking. Small town petrol pump politics, as we call it in Ireland. But he had been looking to buy. We had got the Irish dealership for Scania, the agency for Scania trucks, the Swedish truck, and he wanted to buy 10 or 15 acres out the back of the garage, which was alongside the domain. So the domain would be the 300 acres that was left around the big house. And Olive had said she wasn't interested. She wasn't breaking the estate up anymore. At this stage, to all intents and purposes, she was living in one room with the house falling in around her. The land had quite rightfully, from, the late 1780s, 90s, right up to then the 20s, 1920s and 30s, been given back to the people. So none of these estates could survive, really, because they were all crumbling. And Strokestown was the same. They were living in one room, with the roof leaking on the ground floor. So it was very much faded beyond all recognition of when she was born in the late 1890s. But she called him up one day and said, look, Nicholas, my son, is not going to return, to Strokestown ever. And we're looking at selling the estate. And I think you should consider purchasing it. And my father nearly fell off the chair because he'd only ever been called up there to be given out to before. And he said on this occasion, the butler, brought him into the library and asked him, would he like tea? So he was really confused because that was never part of the procedure of the dressing down that he thought he was going to get. And just that turned to have been really fortuitous. Dad's company decided they would purchase it, but only because they wanted the 15 acres and said they'd never get their hands on it again, and they'd buy it. They allowed her the right to live on there as long as she wanted, and then they intended selling it again. And Olive did live on there for 2 years. And when her husband passed away, Major Hales, she then was getting ready to go to England. To her children were all in England, and she was going to live in a nursing home beside them. And at one point, they were getting everything ready for auctioning, all the contents of the house, etc. And she was. Dad said to her, look, while you're away, do you mind if I have a look around the house? And he said, of course. She said, of course you can, Mr. Callery. It's your house now, because they never left. That kind of Anglo-Irish accent stayed with all of those families, even as everything faded and crumbled around them. And but that weekend, he went into the house and he looked around, and he went into the smoking room at the back of the house, and there was just boxes from ceiling to floor, rain coming in. Some of the boxes were wet. And he was intrigued, so he started kind of looking into some of the boxes. And within about 5 minutes, one of the first things he put his hand on was the Cloonahee petition. And that was August 1846, from the people of the townland of Cloonahee, where my father still lives, where he was reared, where his family has lived for over 300 years. And it literally said, we are starving. We can't withstand our family's cries for food. We have no food. Our potatoes are rotten. We went to the Board of Works to look for work today. We were told they were closed. We don't want to do anything contrary to the laws of God or the land unless pressed to by hunger. And hunger was in capital letters. And he just put that back into the box. And I think he knew immediately what he had stumbled on. And he went to Olive and said, if you leave the archive, I'll buy the contents of the house complete. And that single document, that single day, changed the fate of Strokestown Park forever.
That's amazing.
And she did leave the archive and left the decade of the famine there. A lot of families, when they left, would donate their papers to the States or burnt their papers in the yard or whatever. But most of them removed anything from 1840 to 1850 because they obviously knew how that would reflect on them. So that is the Strokestown Park Archive, which is an absolute gem. I think he knew then that he was, the property had to be kept and that the story had to be told. He would have heard his grandmother talking about the famine to him, and he would have been a keen historian himself. So, and it was interesting because the house itself opened in 1987 and then the museum in 94. And that's because the museum is based and you'll know this because you've been there, in the western wing of the Palladian Manor, which effectively would have been all the stable yard and the estate offices and that. And there was criticism in the beginning because, as I said, in the 70s, there was just still that friction around the big house, that this wasn't an appropriate place to tell the story. Now, some of the people that have criticized it then have since kind of reflected and said, no, actually, but
Sure.
we just felt it was the perfect place because it was juxtaposed beside the big house. The story, the whole complete story was there. And this was the story of the people who had worked there, who had come in there to pay their rent, and that, so it tells the complete story, and you can see all of the layers of it, not just the top layer of the big house.
Well, it's amazing that, you talk about the records and the detail of the records. I mean, one of the things that have been amazed about since we made the walk and everything else was, the booklet that you hand out when you finish the walk, and the amount of information and the detail that's in there, and the research that you guys went through, not just to have the names and faces of those that went on the walk, but then the story of you going and finding the generations afterwards of Daniel and bringing them over to Strokestown, and it being the story of it being his first time out of Canada, let alone to where it all began. I can't imagine just the experience of being there when that individual came. Maybe you could share a little bit of the story. But I mean, we're jumping around. We're really not talking about the walk itself yet, but the people is really what it's all about, though. The individuals and the history behind them. And like you said, those names not being forgotten, those names being given the recognition that people know who they are. I mean, that's the most important thing out of everything you're doing.
Absolutely. And I think that's been the most touching part, is the dignity you can give to these people that they didn't get in their lifetime. But at least now you can restore some of that dignity by restoring their names, by piecing the families back together. And I know we would always say, anybody that's been involved in the project, that we feel them around us at all times. Every body I've approached on the ground in Ireland for the Global Irish Famine Way, for the National Famine Way, it swings open wide. Or you might hit a little thing and go, how are we going to come across that? And then suddenly you really sense them there. And I often say about the Clooney petition even, did Jim Callery find it or did it find him? And it was like, okay, now's our time. We want our story told. And that, I think, is a huge part of the National Famine Way. And one of the stories, because of our 1490, we call them our missing 1490, we have very little information of the generations that are alive today. And there has to be thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands. But one of the family you're speaking to about there is the Thai family, and the National Famine Way passport is actually dedicated to little Daniel Thai. He was a 12-year-old boy who walked that trail with his family in 1847. And it would be very typical of all our people, and I suppose most, famine emigrant families. So I'll tell that story. So Daniel was 12, and his mother, Mary Thai, her husband, Bernard, had passed away, and she had 5 children. And she convinced her brother to go with her and to take, to avail of the assisted emigration scheme. I would always say in a desperate attempt to save her family. And she did save her family, but she paid a very high price. She paid the price of her life, her brother's life, and the lives of 3 of her children. So the only members of the Thai family that survived the journey and onward from Grosse Ile were little Daniel, who was 12, and Catherine, who was 9. And they found themselves in the orphanage in Quebec. And then spent a little bit of time there. And as was the habit then, the local parish priests around Quebec City used to come and take some of the children to bring them out to place them in Catholic families and parishes around the area. And they were passing on a cart through a village or a town called Lotbinière. And this elderly couple, the Colums, who had a 157-acre farm, but they had no children, and they came out because they were looking for, a strong boy to help them, or a child to help them on the farm. And Daniel would be, I suppose, had spent, I think, 6 weeks at that time in the orphanage, so would have filled out, or kind of looked strong. And they chose him, and they take him down off the cart. And then his little sister, Catherine, 9, jumps off the cart, hysterical, clinging onto his leg, because, of course, he's the last person that she knows alive, probably the last person speaking the language she understands. And the Colums very, very humanely said, "On va prendre les deux," we will take them both. And they did. And those 2 little children, over a space of 6 or 8 weeks, had lost everybody in their family bar themselves, had left possibly a quarter of an acre, very little land in Ireland, and found themselves halfway around the world on 157 acres with, in absolute, a strange land. But they had a good life with the Colums, and when Daniel was 18, he was brought in and the farm was signed over to him. Catherine, unfortunately, died in her 30s without having any children. But Daniel went on to live on that farm. He had 12 children.
Oh, wow.
He married Sylvie Boucher. We have photographs of him in his latter years. And that family still live on the farm today. And when Dad was over in Quebec in the year 2000, the Marianne O'Gallagher, the renowned Canadian historian, said to him, I found some of your people. And she said, these are the ties. And she said, I'm going to bring you to meet Leo Tighe. And this still boggles me when I think of it. When you think of the Veil of Silence, you think of everything. So she says, Leo is 91. Leo is Daniel Tighe's grandson. And Leo lived with his grandfather until he was 17, because Daniel Tighe doesn't die until 1924.
Wow.
And has heard Daniel tell the story over and over again. So in the year 2000, they go along, they get a video of Leo telling about the journey, telling about the family story, and keeping it alive as Daniel had told it to him, like a first-hand account of a famine story, and that was recorded at the time. And then a bit like the ship list, or that, it came back and it went into a bag, and the bag sat under a table in an office for about 10 years. And when I was over in Quebec for the 100th anniversary of the cross on Gros Isle, and in 2009, Mariana said to me, you know what? We were fascinated that there was so little knowledge in Strokestown and so little awareness. So we said, let's do a kind of a schools project, a theatre project, over maybe about 3 years, that's kind of to educate the kids through theatre, but also to build awareness in the community. And at the same time, the ship list surfaced out of the archive. So they both kind of coincided. And I said, as part of the theatre project, I said, look, I have an old tape, and we took the tape out. At that stage, it was well defunct, and it had to be digitized and modernized or whatever. And that was the first time that story was told. And the children, who were kind of 13, 14, 15, and they were fascinated with the story of this family, because they weren't long gone 12, and the idea of being halfway around the world and kind of on your own, they found it hard to comprehend.
Sure.
And it really touched them. So in 2013 in Ireland, some of your listeners will probably know, we had what we call the gathering.
Right.
So the government decided, as part of the way to get us out of the economic trauma that we were in, might be to call on our diaspora. But it was quite nice, because the way they structured it was they had a few big events, but then they called out to each community and said, each community should reach out to their diaspora around the world, maybe have an event, whatever it is, but think about what's meaningful in your community. And in chatting with the children, they said, why don't we invite the Thais back home? And we thought this was a great idea. So we chatted with some of the local community groups, and they were really on for it. And at that stage, Leo had passed away, but his son Richard, who was then in his 70s and still living on the farm that Daniel had lived on, we got the Quebec Historical Society to go out to him. And as you said, he didn't have a passport, he didn't speak English, he'd had a few health issues, but he said yes.
Wow.
So himself and his wife, in 2013, came back to Strokestown. First time in 166 odd years the family had set foot on the ground in Strokestown. And we had an amazing 10 days of events. They met their cousins, every community group, the GAA, the local choir. There was a craft display by the old age group. It was the music by Kyotos, everything. But it was really touching because they were like the people in the town as they walked around the town, because they spoke French and didn't speak English. People just went up and kind of put their hands out and patted their shoulder or just touched them. And it was almost like, we're sorry, or we're glad you're home, or, I don't think people themselves even knew exactly what the emotion was, because it's hard to vocalize it sometimes. And it's hard to comprehend how deep the famine story is in the Irish psyche. So that was the story of the Thai family, and we have dedicated our passport to little Daniel Thai. And it was then when the ship list kind of surfaced at the same time, we said, well, we're going to have to do something with this. And we were delighted to have the names. We'd never had the family names before. So we had in 2014, we had the official commemoration in Strokestown Park, and that's a state ceremony that's only in place for about 10 years. And to give credit where credit is due, for about 15 years before that, there was a guy in Dublin who had pushed and tortured the government. It wasn't that they kind of came up with the idea themselves, or they. So now, actually, by legislation, on the third weekend of May, there is an official state commemoration that includes the Army, the Department of Taoiseach, the President, and that was held in Strokestown in 2014. And for that event, they generally give a small fund to put up a piece of art, or a cross, or whatever people want to put up. And we decided that we were going to write our ship lists, engrave them on a glass wall, which would mirror the glass wall in Groseal, because we were twinned with Groseal, which is the quarantine station in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, where over 5,000 people were buried in 1847. And so that was the first step of what turned into the National Famine Way.
Yeah. But I mean, I will say this, the sign, the etching of the names in the glass wall it's moving. I remember when we got there, our very first day, because we started out at the museum, the individual that drove us from Shannon Airport to Strokestown, who I've known for a couple of years now, he's originally from Limerick. He had never been to Strokestown. And so he dropped us off, and he got out, and he starts looking around, and then he goes up to the wall of the names and everything else. And he turns to me, he goes, Michael, he goes, I've only felt like this maybe 2 other times in my life. He goes, just the heaviness of it, and I thought, I mean, it's one thing for, us Irish Americans to come over because we're children of immigrants, which relates to just people leaving the country and then going back. And we all have those moments when we go back because it's just in our history. But to have someone who is, younger than me, in his late 30s, and him have that experience and that feeling when he walks up to it, that kind of hit me as well, to be like, wow, like this does reflect, and press upon people the experience and the trauma. And I really am a little bit surprised that Daniel would would share that story, because I feel like when people go through trauma like that, that's not something they normally do. It's thank God that he did share the story, to his family.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that family went out under the name William Kelly because his uncle was Kelly, because it was his mother's brother. So we could never have found them because they were there as ties, and you know what I mean? So that was the folklore held in the family. But the interesting thing there too, Michael, is like they'd held it really close, and they would have, been connected with Gros Seal and certain articles in Canada, and they knew they were from Strokestown, but they had never reached back. They'd never kind of and that might be a generational thing, I think, because Richard was very humble and very, he was on the farm still, and he, as I say, he didn't have a passport and that. So, but in the same breath, they'd tell the story very, very. It's interesting to see that they would hold it so close and still never have reached back.
Yeah,
that must be the case for quite a number of our 1490. That the stories are out there, and some families know, but they just haven't made that reach back across the Atlantic.
Sure. Now, is that is the Ty family the only one that you know of that has come back to Strokestown since 2013? Have there been any other connections that have been made?
No, and that's something we kind of started on the development of the National Famine Way, and that was we did put a call out in a number of locations, but we didn't really. We've had a number of people, but we haven't been able to kind of verify that any of those are actually the Strokestown people. Professor Mark McGowan in the University of Toronto has put together a very comprehensive database of those that survived, those that passed away. In particular, the orphan group we have quite a bit of knowledge on. We thought we might be able to follow people all the way down, but what turns out is that we have people in the 51 census, some people in the 61 census, and then they disappear. So we think a lot of people are going down into the US. We've done a full genealogy on Daniel's family, and really interestingly, we find 3 of his sons with a store on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, which is like quite mind-boggling. Yeah. So there was a lot of moving about at that stage, and because our ships came into Canada, we did find that a lot of people were going to meet families that had gone before, or neighbors, or they had contacts. So the ships, they had no choice about where the ship landed, but that a lot of them were going down into the States. And we know of at least 40 or maybe 50 families on our ship list that did that. And we haven't got around to that yet, but we are just starting. We're just starting a project with actually a wonderful genealogical. There are a couple from Cork called Letter from Ireland.
Oh, I think they actually have a podcast themselves, or so. I actually think I follow them on social media.
Yeah, and they do a really lovely weekly letter. Like, it's really short, but it's just about little bits and pieces and a bit of a chat over a cup of tea.
Sure.
And that's Mike Collins. So they've started looking into a number of families for us. So we are hoping. The only other family we have a lot of information about were the Quinn brothers, and the Quinn brothers both became priests. And one of them returned in the late 1880s and brought over his niece, actually went back with him. And they spoke about the experience as well, and the trauma and the lack of food on the boat and that. But one of them at the French Congress in 1912 retold the story. And they actually really touchingly have the jacket that one of them wore. And that's in an archive in Richmond in Canada. So we're hoping maybe to get that out as part of the Global Irish Famine Way.
Wow.
But the little jacket that was actually worn doing the walk, would be a very rare artifact. And they tell the story that their mother and father and 3 of their siblings had passed away, very like the Thai family story. And they're on Gros Seal, and their father is sick and dying on Gros Seal, and they bring the 2 little boys up to him, and his dying words to them were, "Remember your soul and your liberty." I think is a lovely. every time I touch the bronze shoes, I just quietly say,
Yeah.
remember your soul and your liberty. And like, what would you say to your two little boys on your deathbed? You know, it was horrific. But yeah, so those were the two families we knew about. The that are from Ireland are doing good work on the Sheridan family and a number of other families. So they're kind of looking a lot of our people were in Niagara and then went down into the Lockport area
Okay.
that kind of crosses the border. Yeah. So they're focusing on that at the minute. It's a big piece of work, genealogy. I discovered that when
Oh,
I started looking at Daniel Ty with his 12 children to start off.
Oh, and you can go down that rabbit. You can go down that rabbit hole. We've done that. Yeah.
I'm out of my depth, I thought to myself.
So when
I think that everything else is, yep.
I was just going to say when you put together the Famine Way itself, did you know the route that they had taken? Was that in the documentation, or was there research that had to be done to see or was it always known that they just followed the Grand Canal all the way down?
Yeah, so I suppose if I pick up at the glass wall in 2014, we were kind of looking at the names and we began to wonder, we knew about the ships, we knew about the high death rate on the ships, and everybody knows about the coffin ships. But we just began to wonder what their last journey on Irish soil was like.
Sure.
And it wasn't in the documentation. We do have a letter from Bailiff Robinson, who accompanied them all the way from Liverpool, to say that they all made it. They're all there safe. They got held up a while kind of in Liverpool, but everybody had embarked the boats now. But we also have a newspaper clipping of them arriving on the quays in Dublin.
Really?
And saying that that they're tenants of Dennis Mahon's, and that there's about 2,000 of them behind, following on the first of them as they came onto the quays. So we knew they had kind of arrived that way. So we did our research, and at the time, the motorway of the day would have been the Royal Canal, and that goes from Dublin to Clondra and Longford, and Strokestown is about 20 kilometres from Clondra, and the whole trail is 165 kilometres, or about 100 miles. So we knew that they had walked to Clondra and then just joined the canal to keep the group together. It would have been obviously a very busy environment at the time, not as peaceful, Michael, as you engaged with it.
No.
In all its beauty and nature. There would have been barges and horses and hawkers and all sorts going on. But
I never thought about that along the walk.
Just a group of us, 6 of us.
I never thought about that idea along the walk.
Yeah.
That it wouldn't be peaceful. They wouldn't have been alone, just like the group of them. There would have been a lot of activity along the way. I never thought about that. It's true.
Oh, absolutely. And these barges didn't have toilet facilities, so people were jumping off onto the banks and going into the ditch and jumping on again, and all sorts of things would have been going on. When they got to Mullingar, they would have been building the railways on the far side, and our historical research shows there was kind of, 500 men, I think, working, and the clanging of that, and they would have met the steam engine somewhere up around Enfield, and so it would have been a really ever-changing, noisy, hustly, bustly landscape, a bit like walking up the M1 today, or something akin to that. But
wow! So when
so a group of us.
Oh no, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, so in 2015, there was 6 of us just decided that we'd follow in their footsteps, just as a once off. But as we walked, it was quite amazing. They're just the interest locally, nationally, internationally. Locals were coming out and kind of, walking alongside us. We put a small call out in each county on local radio and said, look, we're passing through, we're leaving here at such a time. And you come out of your accommodation and there'd be 5 or 6 people standing on the banks, to walk with you, or there'd be people joining in along the way. And you knew there were people that weren't maybe crazily into history, but just wanted to touch that part of our history or that story, and then it was picked up by RTE, covered it. It was mentioned in it all. Then from the US, all the Irish American kind of newspapers covered it. So we began to realise that there was kind of something in what we were doing. And Waterways Ireland, who were a wonderful partner and owned the land along the canal, kind of sat down with us afterwards and said, look, we're actually working on the pathways. They were about 50% done and 50% field stroke bog at that stage. We'll be finished the pathways in 2019, and we'd like to look at us doing, a long-term and official national trail. Maybe we'll do it again in 2017. We'll need to build up the partners with the local councils, and then in 2019, we'll hope to have all of those completed all the way to Maynooth, and we could maybe launch the trail then. And quite unusual for Ireland, it actually happened thus, on time, on schedule, and the pathways were completed for 2019, and the partnerships with the councils, who were amazing. Between the councils and Waterways Ireland, the council sponsored the bronze shoes. There are 32 pairs interspersed along the trail. The Waterways Ireland did the plinths, and the signage was done by the councils, etc. So that kind of, the trail was launched officially in 2019. And I suppose just to talk a little bit about the bronze shoes, and you'll have seen them.
Oh yeah, that was going to be my next question, because I feel that we were very fortunate to be introduced to the bronze shoes before we even undertook the walk, just because of our relationship with Christine Keneally and being able to just understand what they were and what they represented from the get-go. But yeah, I definitely think our listeners would be interested in just hearing the history behind that and the significance of them.
Yeah, so when we were launching the trail in 2019, we were kind of thinking, what we should have a little symbol. And, people were saying, well, the Camino has a shell. And so we were kind of thinking about it and thinking what it could possibly be. And our wonderful manager, John O'Driscoll in Strokestown Park, said to me, Caroilin, I think I have the thing. He said, I have a pair of children's shoes that were left in here, again, 20 years ago, that sat quietly waiting for their time. He said they were given to me by a local farmer who was tumbling a cottage, a 19th century cottage, and they were tucked away very purposely in the roof of the cottage. And the folklore he had about it was that was done for good luck. And again, I went in and took the lid off the little shoebox, and I was just thought, absolutely, these are so perfect. It's children's shoes. 2/3 of our people that were walking were women and children. Sadly, the people who suffer most in times like this. It was the binding. They were bound together, with a really thin strip of linen, maybe 20 or 30 times wrapped around the midsection of the shoes, very purposely. And I just thought that sense that the shoes were going to be, it wasn't going to be an easy journey. It was going to be a difficult journey, both walking to Dublin and on the ships. And then even if you got unbound, that tying back home, the binding back home, was always going to be there for those who had to leave. That sense that somewhere back there is your homeland, where you came from, or your people came from. And that all of that just spoke to me, really, really loudly. And we knew instantly these are going to be our little icon. And it, again, I suppose one of the things about the National Famine Way is that we've done so much research and we have so much information. It's a way of sharing that with people who do trail in an easily accessible and meaningful way. So we gathered all of the stories about what's happening in all the counties. We worked with the archivists and local history groups. And then we decided we would get 32 pairs of those bronze shoes, and they're interspersed at key locations throughout the 165 kilometres. And then Marisha Conlon McKenna, the wonderful Irish novelist of Under the Hawthorn fame, she wrote 32 little vignettes in the voice of 12-year-old Daniel Ty, reimagining what he would have seen as he walked the trail in that location. So you can kind of, when you see the bronze shoes, there's, and then there's the local history. And both of those are audio. So you can listen to those as you walk, and you can look around and see what you're talking about. Again, like that, we imagined him watching the first steam train. And at Ballymahon, there's grain stores coming in and out. So we know there was food being exported. So we have a barge full of grain, and Daniel and the other little kids are watching it, and the regiment of soldiers that's escorting it to protect it. And at night, then they go and try and steal a bit of it. And so all of the reimaginings are connected to specific, locations and what we know were happening at that time. And then we have the information on the family, so people walk with a ship ticket in the footsteps of one of the families. And as you say, when you arrive in Dublin, then you don't just get your certificate, you get what happened to your family, their particular fate, and you get the 30-page booklet that tells you what happened next. And that was all based on the work of Professor Mark McGowan and Christine Keneally, two huge friends of the project, both of them who have walked it, Mark once and Christine 2.5 times, I think. So, again, walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Right.
But yeah, so it's great to be able to share such a depth of research and knowledge in a user-friendly way. And the modern world is great for that. And our little bronze shoes are the central icon to all of that.
Right. And, you say that about just the interactivity and the information. I can't even fathom the amount of work that must have went in to put it all together and then have all that information and then put it into the app and make it easily accessible. And it really is an amazing undertaking that you guys were able to accomplish. I mean, it really is. It's absolutely, there's not even words to describe, how successful you guys were in what you were trying to do.
I think it's quite a rare trail in that it's kind of topped and tailed by an iconic museum that's connected to its story. And then all along the trail, you're picking up on the story. And then at the end, it's, and I suppose a lot of people say it's not a trail, it's a pilgrimage, and you are walking in their footsteps. And we wanted to honor them as much as we could. I have to say, it probably was one of the silver linings on the big dark cloud that was COVID, because a lot of that very detailed work got done between Joe Tynan and myself and Mark McGowan and Christine while we were all housebound for about 1.5 years, because it is very detailed and specific, and it has to be accurate. And the county councils and those historians. So, I mean, the passport and the app and the education pack, which is fantastic actually on the website, were all done during that time. But it was super, and it's lovely to hear you say that, it helps deepen the experience for people.
Oh, it definitely does.
That's what we were hoping to achieve.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. So with all the work that you and everybody involved has done, I feel like, and we have this discussion as, in our AOH division and in our Irish American and Irish abroad community here within, Massachusetts and Boston is that whether it's just because we're so many generations removed from it, so it's easier to kind of reflect, or because of work done by people like yourself and everybody surrounded by it, I feel like there's a lot of passion now that is being shared by a lot of people to further understand that time period and the trauma. And one book series that we really haven't talked about here on the podcast that Christine Keneally and a couple others have been involved with is that there were people that, there weren't just people that didn't help during the famine. There were people that did great things and saved individuals and people and everything else. And And we're not talking, we're talking modern day research that's being done and everything else. And what you guys have done has inspired, and we'll get into other parts of it, but now it's getting to a global Irish Famine Way, which I think is absolutely amazing. And you guys were lucky enough to unveil your first location at Grosse Ile. What was the work that was put in to having that come to fruition? And then the experience, I mean, it was only just a few weeks ago that the unveiling happened. I mean, that must have been an amazing experience.
Yeah, that was Ottawa. So I suppose we knew that our people didn't finish their journey, didn't finish in Liverpool, or didn't finish in Ireland on the Keys. That they went on to Liverpool and then on to Canada. And we had already just pre-COVID begun to reach out for conversations with Liverpool. Had it in our heads, that the next obvious place was Canada and the United States, but probably thought that was about 10 years out. Until I got an email from the then Irish ambassador in Canada, who was an historian, and said, "Look, I'm really interested in making the Irish history visible in Canada. I've heard about this National Famine Way. Can I do a Zoom with you or whatever?" And you jump to when you get an email from an ambassador. So I was like, okay. But I have to say, he's a tour de force. We just hit it off straight away. I said, he said, let's look at Grosse Ile. And then as he looked at Grosse Ile, he said, Caroilin, let's just take a hold on this for about 12 months. Let's not just go straight on to Grosse Ile. I think there's a lot of interest in other locations. And then last May, there was like 15 pairs of bronze shoes sailed on the Celtic Voyager across the sea. It was important to us that they didn't go by air and landed in Canada. And there are those 15 locations will be being unveiled slowly over this summer and over next summer. It's interesting. We work with, a local Irish group in an area. But then obviously, because they don't own the land in the same way that we didn't own Waterways Ireland or the councils, then they partner up with a suitable location. It might be Parks Canada, it might be, the city. They then go through a process with the city in relation to where the location might be, and that can take several months, etc. And then obviously the plinths have to be made. The plinths are identical to the plinths in Ireland. The text on that is identical to the text. And then all of that due process has to be gone through. So it was, so then the first time of the unveiling we had was in Ottawa on June 13th. And it was one of those, one of those moments, I suppose, that the hair stands up on the back. Really, I'm looking at a plinth of bronze shoes in Canada, in Ottawa, sitting on a burial site of 300 famine Irish people whose story had been forgotten. Michael McBain, who was the lead there, who was a MacDonald Gardens, which was a park in the middle of Ottawa, which had previously been a cemetery. And as far as everybody knew, the bodies had all been removed way back in the 20s or 30s to a new location. And it was Michael that unearthed the research that said that was only people who could afford to pay to move their people, and that there were 300 Irish bodies, unclaimed famine victims, left under one section of the graveyard. And they had to go through quite an elaborate process. They had to do radar. They had to go through the whole city council on a vote in the council and everything. So that's quite a special site as well. And it's because they're so identical to the Irish ones. To see them in a different country and a different location and still insisting on telling the story and unveiling a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And there was a couple of hundred people turned out. It was quite amazing. And even the queue afterwards for people to go up and just touch the little shoes and get their photos taken. And some people were nearly in tears. And that makes you understand, I suppose, the power of a symbol to connect deeply again in people. Just that sense of touching home or touching the tragedy that was the Great Famine. was there as well. But it was a beautiful ceremony. Grosil will unveil later this year, and that will be a very special moment.
Sure.
And as you said, you got to see the shoes before they came, because Christine had a pair, and it's interesting to see, because it takes about a year really from when the shoes arrived until people start getting all of the different bits and pieces together and all the processes. And so the bronze shoes have been brought to nearly every Irish occasion in those cities in Canada. St. Patrick's Day and university lectures, and I mean, the photos in the group is amazing to see where they've been. And I know Catherine Shannon, the wonderful Professor Catherine Shannon, who is another great friend to the project, won't rest easy until you have a pair close to you there.
Oh, no. And it's funny you talk about the response that the public had to the shoes in Ottawa when Christine brought the pair of shoes to our Break St. John commemoration. We processed into Mass. We brought the shoes with us, and we laid them in front of the altar along with some of the artifacts from the shipwreck. And after the Mass was over, there were several people that came out of the pews, and they walked up in front of the altar, and they just would touch the shoes, and then they would kneel and say a prayer. And it's just that it's the, like you said, it's the response of people that are able to reflect, and have some sort of bond. And be able to touch and, so it's, they mean a lot. They probably mean a lot of things to different people, but there's definitely a connection there between the public that understands where they come from. So it's, Yeah.
And Eamon McKee, the ex-ambassador, has been amazing, and John Concannon, the new ambassador. So I think, and then I suppose what happened was we thought we were just following the Strokestown Trail, but it became clear to us because of people's responses that they were really symbolic of all Irish famine emigrants. And we had a lot of inquiries, not just from Canada, but from certain locations in the US. But we decided, okay, we're let's take these first 15 pairs of shoes. And take a deep breath, because it has all been voluntary up until now. But we have just recently, the 7 councils have come together, and they are appointing an official officer for the National and Global Irish Famine Way, which will be brilliant. Wow. We've just finished interviewing, so hopefully in the next kind of 4 to 6 weeks we'll have somebody in post, and that'll be a game changer. And we also are working on a new website, which was sponsored by Fáilte Ireland, which is fantastic. And that will have a Global Irish Famine Way section. So that will, and that's a bespoke website, which is fantastic. So for people doing the walk, there'll be a lot better information than you had, Michael. I'm sorry to tell you.
Oh, no. But, I thought the website for something as new as what was put together, I thought the website was great. There's so much information that you guys have on the website alone, so yeah. But
the new website will have all of the global element in that, and that should launch maybe, I would say, the end of the summer. Yeah, it's well underway.
Okay. Do you have a plan? I know every couple of years you and a lot of the group of the founders and have done the research, have done commemorative walks. Do you guys have another one of those in planning that?
Good question. Yes, we are looking at having a major conference in Strokestown and possibly Dublin in 2027 for the 180th anniversary of Black 47. And that will be connecting all of the Global Famine Way chapters or any other interested parties. And as part of that, we will be doing another commemorative walk.
Okay. So I'm going to put that in my calendar.
Want to get your plans together for 2027.
You say that, and we will be. I think it's something as an organization with the Ancient Order of Hibernians. I think it's something that we should make a priority for, and that's going to be something that I'm kind of going to be pushing pretty recent, pretty soon, because you know how it is. Like, you have to plan when you're doing international trips. You have to start that planning early. So, and there's not a there's a decent amount of accommodations along the trek. If you had a great number of people showing up to do the walk, I think people would be intense at some point.
We can only take so many at a time. It's a kind of a chicken and egg. Yeah, and we'll be fixing the date for that once the new officer is in place. That date will be fixed, and it'll be on the website. So, and we'll be kind of letting people know. But yeah, and it's interesting because there is a program called Just Transition that's running across the counties in the Midland of Ireland. And they have just sanctioned a lot of funding for private accommodation.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of really interesting. I know of 4 or 5 in our area. So there's and kind of old country houses and cottages, and like one is a glamping site that's been made out of the body of an aircraft in about 10 pods, and the other is an old lodge that was a bar. So yes, I think that's beginning to filter through the accommodation bit of it, and they have to have their accommodation completed by the start of the 2026 season. So that'll bring a reasonable bit, kind of number of extra accommodation, but nice, kind of quirky, as I call it, accommodation.
Oh yeah, the glamping thing sounds really fun
because they have to reach. Yeah. I haven't yet done it by tent. I've been tempted so many times. I've done a lot of it barefoot. I've done it in costume. I've done it 6 or 7 times. I know at some point, and maybe 2027 is that point, because one would feel guilty taking a room on that occasion, I think.
Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah.
So the next thing I would bring up, just because there was another individual that I was very fortunate to meet when I was out there, and then she actually had a little stint over here the last couple of weeks. It's what Strokestown and the National Famine Way and everybody's research and reflection, how it's inspiring other people and other things to come about, to inform and educate and remember and everything else. And I was very fortunate to meet Anne-Marie over there when I was in Strokestown, and her, along with her great partner, Amy, who were both over in the U.S. for a couple of weeks, kind of on a little fact-finding mission, have put together a musical play called In the Midst of Plenty, which I have not seen. I've seen clips of it. I've not seen it in person. It's something where, and they just made an announcement on social media that they're going to bring the show back again next year. And I think I would get on a plane and I would come to see the show. I mean, the music is amazing. I've been very lucky. I've listened to the music driving around for work and things like that. But it really hits me when people achieve something, and then when you're done, you inspire others. And I feel like you and your group have done that. And that's an amazing thing.
Yeah, and it's an amazing show. It would be worth getting on a plane to go to see. It's a musical on the Strokestown story. And Amy Day, who's a lecturer in human rights in San Diego, had visited the museum a few years before COVID and was very taken by it. And then during COVID, this was her project. Anne-Marie is on the ground in Strokestown, fantastic theatre maker. And they worked on the show. It was singularly, I mean, I've seen almost every stage production. I've read an awful lot of the novels, the poetry, everything in relation to the famine. It got standing ovations in every location. It's so beautifully written. The music is so beautiful. It's such a hard subject for either theatre or, stage. But it is the best performance I've ever seen about the famine story. And the music and the lyrics, and just when the dialogue gets too hard, a song comes in and you can absorb it that way, just that little bit better. And And it's really, in essence, a human piece about, what will a family do to survive when their back is up, against the wall. And it's the story of two or three families, and it's heartbreaking, but so beautiful at the same time. Yeah. So I hope they're very successful in their plans to tour the States with it, or
I think they
North
got
America.
a real eye opener when they were, because I saw them and they were kind of 3/4 of the way through their tour. They started down in New York City, made their way up to Connecticut, Boston, and then they made their way up to Ottawa. And the thing they got from basically everybody along the way was, not only do you need to bring the show back to Ireland, but when are you going to bring it to the States? And I think that really kind of like threw them off. Like they were like, "Oh, wow!" And I even said it to them. I said, "You would not be able to keep the seats if you brought that to the States, because of, like you said, the connection people still want to make, be able to reflect, be able to know." And it's like I said, I think it's amazing when you accomplish something, but when your accomplishments inspire other people, you're at a different level at that point, and that's a hands off to you and everybody at the Strokestown Park and the Famine Way and everything else.
Well, it's my father for starting it all, I guess. But it's interesting because I've watched this happen really slowly. Like from 94 to 2004, there was kind of that, what would you call it? Let's call it slightly bitterness was the biggest tone when the veil came off first. Very kind of anti-British. And that was difficult at the time because the peace process was just settling in. So it was all kind of if someone would say something and then it would be, and it was all the kind of stereotypical response. Then the academics came in, the Christine Keneally's and the Mark McGowans, and they began to dig deeper and look at the complexities of it. That kind of went on for 10 years. And in the last 7 or 8 years, I'm just watching this huge bubbling of the creative process. And you have and younger people. So when you said that man of 30 just knelt in front of the glass wall or stood in front of the glass wall, and this surprises me all the time. You have things like that wonderful folklore singer. He has Chronicles of the Great Irish Famine, a young man in his 30s. You have Amy's musical. You have Paul Lynch's book, Grace. You have Black 47, the movie. There's another Irish movie. And all of these younger people engaging deeply. So I think we're not really... the unveiling started around the 150th anniversary in 94. I think that that academic rigor gives a huge resource to the creative world. And they are younger and they're interested and they are exploring it and they are shaping it into all sorts of different contexts and examining it. And I think it's wonderful. And I think that will go on for quite a decade to come.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is. It's once you get creative people involved, and then, like you said, it's almost like there's been a lag in it due to social, political issues and everything else. But now it's in the hands of a generation that might not hold that baggage.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And it's like, even say my background would be theatre, so I would say that the Famine Way is making history visible. So you're taking the story that's inside the museum wall in Strokestown, and you're literally walking it from west to east, the whole middle of the country, through the community, saying, "Look, here's a pair of shoes. This is the story. This is part of our story." And that's what, that's so beautiful. I love when local people stumble on the shoes and go, "Oh, what's this?"
Sure.
And we've had people send poems back, going like, "We stumbled on the shoes and we worked it out, and here's a poem I wrote," or, and I think you're right. Possibly it's this generation don't have the baggage, don't have the, it's just they're that little bit freer of the weight the attitude, I think. I don't know, it's hard to put words on it, but like I said to you before, the burning of the house, don't look at it, don't look at the story. They're gone. We just want to shut the door and not think about it. And that's post-traumatic stress disorder, really.
Definitely.
To a certain degree.
Yeah. So one thing I want to bring up before we start closing it off is that we talk about people doing the walk and taking the walk. And we've spoken about it in previous shows as we're leading up to our own walk, but I want to talk about your dad, because your dad is he 90? That's how he celebrated his 90th birthday, was walking the walk?
That's how he celebrated his 90th birthday, was
God bless him.
The walk. Yeah. He said, I don't want a party. We'll just spend a lot of money eating and drinking, and everyone will have sore heads the next morning. And then he couldn't decide what he wanted to do. And about 6 weeks out from his 90th birthday, on the 15th of October, he rang me and he said, I know what I want to do, but your mother won't like it. And she didn't. And people were saying to me, Caroilin, you can't let him do that. I'm like, do you know, Dad? Like, there's no can't let. Yeah, so over a number of days, he walked between 12 and 20 kilometres a day in various weathers. One day of horrific wind and rain, the rest not so bad. And he arrived into Dublin for his 90th birthday on the 15th of October.
And he didn't do it just for himself. From what I understand, he raised himself a little bit of money for a great cause too.
No, yeah. Yes. He had set himself a target of about 25,000 euros. He wanted to give money to current day emigration. And that's always been a really important to us at the museum. It's like Dad once said, there's no point in this being a dead museum. You know, we've got to try and shed light on current day problems. We've got to try and shed light on where, you know, what's happening around the world. And that's ever more relevant. I remember in 2015, when we did the first walk, on the second day, I got a phone call that literally took the wind out of me. Someone rang me to tell me that a ship had overturned in the Mediterranean Sea and 600 emigrants had been drowned off the coast of Italy. And I just couldn't get my head around it, that like, how is our past someone else's present? How has the method of fleeing become more dangerous than what you're fleeing? How are people so unscrupulous that they pack so many people into boats like they did in the famine time? How are waters so unregulated that they can get away with this? And it just, so that would be something very close to our hearts. We work with current emigrants. In 17 and 19, we had groups of emigrants walking with us, and they will say, this is our story, this is what's happened to us, you know.
Sure.
And Dad would feel very much the same. So he decided he was going to fundraise for an immigrant charity. He ended up fundraising 164,000 euros.
Wow, that's amazing.
So he divvied that over 4 charities.
Wow, good for him.
Yeah. So the charities there is a lovely charity that we do work with, the New Horizons refugee support group in Athlone in County Roscommon, and we work with them. Jerry had actually done the walk with us himself, and they do super work supporting immigrants. Then the Captain Day Centre, who has been on the go for a long time, they have a kitchen that gives breakfast, dinner, tea, has doctor's service, dental services, you know, all of those things that we don't think of. And then a lovely charity called Schools of Sanctuary. So they go out into schools and they do a program over a year. They set up a Schools of Sanctuary committee, and it goes across the school, and the children run it, and they go through several programs, and then they're certified for as a school of sanctuary. So they were lovely charities, and lovely to be able to spread it across a number of charities.
Well, you know, it's one thing that I have said on our show several times is when we're having events here, you know, one thing that I always say is that it's the stories we tell aren't Irish stories, they're immigrant stories. And you know, and very well put how you just said it. It's amazing that our past from 150, 160 years ago, 180 years ago is someone's present today in this day and age. You know, that is kind of, that's. Yeah.
A
Well,
little bit shameful,
it
really.
is.
Yes.
It is. What I would say is we're probably gonna be wrapping up. What would you like to share with people here, in the States and listening to get them to come to Raw? I mean, I'm a huge proponent. You don't have to pay me a marketing fee. I am just everyone I tell when they ask about how our trip was. I just there's so much I tell them and just can't. It's glowing, the experience that I tell them about us being there and experiencing it and everything else. But I would like to hear, have people hear it from you though.
Yeah, I think Anthony Russell, who did the walk a number of times with us from the beginning, I remember asking him, what are your thoughts? And he said, this walk engages heart, mind, feet, and soul. I just thought there's a lot in that. And he got awful blisters. Poor Anthony. But so there's just, I think I always call it a touch across time. There's times when you're doing the walk that that time closes in and you touch them and they touch you. And I don't think anyone's ever quite the same again after doing it. So it is a once in a lifetime experience, really.
I would definitely agree with that.
And an honor to be able to honor them by walking in their footsteps.
Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you for coming on today. This was great. What we went over, we usually went for the amount of time we usually go, but man, it was well worth it. Thank you so much. I mean, you're calling in. I know there's the time change and everything else. But yeah, I want to thank you for calling in. I feel like the theme of our shows over the last couple of weeks has been all about this, but I think that just that's just a commentary on how much I know I was affected by going on the walk, as well as the other members of our division that came along as well. I think everybody was touched in their own different way, just the experience of all of it. And the experience of coming up to Strokestown and being there with all of you and just how passionate you all are for what you're doing too. It's not a cold museum, for something that the topic is so heavy and traumatic. I feel like there's a lot of joy and there's a lot of happiness in the hearts of the people that are doing this work right now. In multiple facets. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And it was a pleasure to meet you and your colleagues.
Yeah.
And I know you had a great time with Catherine Shannon as well. So,
yeah. And we're excited to come back.
Yeah. Well, you are welcome back anytime. We'll get that 2027 date for you and all your listeners, or anytime in between, obviously.
Oh, obviously. No, but we'll definitely be in touch. Like I'm in the process of working with a travel agent over here to do like a big group travel to see whoever wants the opportunity to do it to go over and experience it.
Super.
So I think that'll be great.
Fantastic. Super.
So thank you for coming on. Thank you for everything that you do. And thank you for your dad for having the foresight when he came across everything. If you want to learn more about the National Famine Way, you can go to their website, www.nationalfamineWay.ie. You can get all kinds of information there about the Thai family and Daniel and information on the different spots along the way. They have a great website that has accommodations listed out, groups to contact, and everything to be able to go over there and experience walking with the 1490. I would also like to say, just to keep tabs on us on our social media. We have photos and content on there on our Instagram and on our Facebook about our experience over on the National Way. We routinely share posts by the National Way because they're always sharing great information on what's going on with the Strokestown Park and with the Famine Way in general. So that would be great. And again, like I would just like to say thank you for coming on, Caroilin. This was great.
For me to meet them all.
If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend. And if you have a story to tell or a topic you'd love to hear about, reach out to us by emailing us at craiconthecoast@gmail.com. That's CRAIC onthecoast@gmail.com. And until next time, Slán go fóill, goodbye for now, and may the Craic be mighty wherever you are. Thank you.